The first time I sank into the trench, I thought the silence was comforting, until I saw a stream of bubbles drifting past me in the dark. They weren't mine, and that's when I remembered the list of rules taped inside my helmet. A set of 11 warnings I was told never to break if I wanted to surface alive. I laughed at them once, thinking they were old sailors' tales, but the ocean has a way of teaching lessons you don't forget. I still hear the voice of my partner the night he ignored one of the rules, and I've never seen him again. The question is, what followed him instead? I had been descending for nearly 20 minutes when I saw them. A pale trail of bubbles rising through the water just ahead, too far from my body to belong to me. My own stream drifted steadily upward behind my mask, but these new ones felt wrong, almost staged, as if placed exactly where my eyes would catch them. That was when I remembered Rule 1, never follow the bubbles that aren't yours. A rule my supervisor drilled into me so hard it felt less like advice and more like a warning carved into bone. Still, in the crushing silence of the trench, with nothing but the groan of my regulator and the creak of pressure in my ears, the sight of another's breath lured me in ways I couldn't fully explain. It wasn't supposed to be possible. No one else was scheduled to dive with me, and our boat carried only 2 tanks, mine and Lewis's. He had stayed topside to monitor the tether lines, his voice on comms my lifeline to the world above. Yet when I glanced at my depth gauge and flicked my torch beam through the gloom, the trail of bubbles never drifted or dispersed. They climbed in perfect rhythm, deliberate and steady, like someone was exhaling just out of sight. For a second, my instincts screamed to follow, to prove there was someone down there with me, but the weight of the rule pressed heavy in my chest. Rules in the trench weren't superstition, they were survival written in blood. I steadied myself, letting my body hover as neutrally buoyant as I could manage. The trench below me was a black canyon, its walls stretching into infinity, swallowing light with a hunger that felt alive. The darkness had a way of tricking divers, making shadows appear closer, sounds carry in ways they shouldn't. My torch cut through only a few feet of it, a sickly cone that revealed little more than suspended particles drifting like ash. The bubbles beyond it shimmered silver for a moment, then vanished into the black above. I thought about calling Lewis on comms, asking if he saw anything on sonar, but the last thing I wanted was to admit I was seeing things. Pressure squeezed against my suit, my ears throbbing with every meter deeper I went, but I forced myself to breathe slow, controlled. Panic was the enemy down here. The ocean could smell it on you, and once fear took hold, the trench would close in and never let go. I angled my body away from the phantom trail, focusing instead on the mission, documenting thermal vent formations for a research institute that promised a fat paycheck. Science didn't care about ghosts, but divers like me had learned long ago that money couldn't bury what waited in the dark. Every job came with its own set of rules, and these 11 had kept me alive longer than most. As I drifted forward, the comms unit hissed softly, static bleeding through as though someone had brushed their mouth across the mic. "Stay where you are," a voice whispered, low and urgent. My blood froze. It wasn't Lewis. The tone was deeper, more deliberate, as if each syllable had been shaped carefully to mimic human speech. My first thought was that another diver had somehow joined me, maybe from another expedition, but that was impossible at this depth without coordination. I didn't respond, my throat tight, and for a long moment the only sound was the thump of my pulse filling my helmet. Then faint but clear, I heard it again, a steady exhale right behind me. I spun, beam jerking across the trench wall, but there was nothing. My own bubbles trailed upward, breaking against the weight of the sea, but now I could see them splitting, doubling, as though someone else's breath had joined mine. They rose in a twin column, twirling together, silver ribbons dissolving into the abyss. My hands shook as I adjusted the torch, trying to catch a glimpse of a face, a fin, anything that could explain it, but the water swallowed the light like it had been waiting. Lewis's voice crackled through at last, strained and faint. "Depth check. Over." Relief flooded me, but when I tried to answer, the comms fizzled with nothing but static. For the first time I noticed how alone I truly was. The boat above might as well have been a world away. My depth gauge ticked another 5 feet, the pressure making my jaw ache, yet I couldn't shake the pull of those bubbles. They drifted with such precision, never faltering, never scattering like normal air. I remembered an old diver's story I'd once overheard at a bar in Guam about the trench, carrying imprints of lost souls, their last breaths replaying over and over to lure the living into their grave. I'd laughed at it back then. Now, with my torch beam failing to catch even the faintest shadow of another body, the story felt less like folklore and more like prophecy. I forced myself to turn away, every muscle in my body screaming to look back. My chest ached, not from lack of oxygen, but from the strain of resisting that magnetic pull. When I finally angled downward again, the trench seemed to shift. The canyon walls that had loomed so distant now pressed closer, jagged stone ridges framing my descent like a gaping mouth. I blinked hard, swore I saw them pulse as though breathing, and in that brief lapse of focus the bubbles appeared again, this time directly ahead of me. My heart lurched. They hadn't drifted, they had moved. I froze, torch trembling in my grip, watching them rise from an invisible source no more than 6 feet in front of me. My body screamed to flee, but my mind whispered an uglier truth. If the bubbles could move, then they could follow. I inched backward, eyes locked on the silver stream as if it would vanish if I blinked. For a moment, I swore I saw a silhouette within them, faint and distorted, like a face pressed against frosted glass. The features stretched unnaturally long, eyes too wide, mouth open in a perfect circle of breath. My regulator hissed loudly in my ears, and I realized too late that my breathing had sped up, feeding the thing with my panic. The comm sparked alive again, but instead of Lewis, it was the same deep voice as before, clearer this time, closer. "You're not supposed to see me." The words rattled inside my helmet, heavy as stone, and the bubbles pulsed violently, scattering and reforming as though alive. My hands fumbled for the tether line clipped to my belt, the one that linked me to the boat above, but the rope slackened in my grip. Something was pulling at it from below. My stomach dropped. The bubbles weren't rising anymore. They were circling me. I kicked hard, fins slicing against the crushing black torch beam, jerking wildly across rock and water. For every foot I gained, the tether tightened again, dragging me down, the bubbles following in a spiral like predators scenting blood. My lungs burned with effort, regulator hissing in short bursts, and through the chaos I thought I heard Lewis shouting my name. I didn't dare respond. The last sound I wanted was that other voice answering back. With one final wrench, I tore the tether free, the rope slipping from my hand like it had been waiting for release. The bubbles vanished. 1 second they surrounded me, silver halos closing in, and the next, nothing. Just black water pressing in from every side, crushing silence that rang louder than any scream. My torch beam found only rock, featureless and cold, but I couldn't shake the certainty that something was still there, just outside the circle of light, watching. My breath came ragged, erratic, fogging the edges of my mask as I steadied myself, but then I noticed something worse. Rising past my mask, faint and deliberate, another trail of bubbles appeared, this time coming from above me, as if something was waiting higher up between me and the surface. The bubbles above me spiraled into the dark, vanishing before my torchlight could catch them. But I didn't need to see what made them to know it was waiting. My instincts screamed to rise, to claw my way back toward the faint shimmer of surface light. But before I could kick upward, my comms crackled to life again. "Hey, it's me," the voice said. Too casual, too familiar, and for a fleeting second, I almost believed it was Lewis. But then the words echoed a second time, identical in tone and rhythm, and I remembered Rule 2, never trust a voice that comes through the comms twice. At first I thought maybe the signal had looped, some interference bouncing the sound back into my helmet, but the longer I hovered in that black water, the more wrong it felt. True static was chaotic, unpredictable, but this was precise. Each syllable landed exactly the same, like it had been recorded and played back with surgical intent. My chest tightened as I realized the ocean was more than silent. It was listening. Something was repeating Lewis's voice, because it wanted me to answer. And if I did, I had the sick feeling it wouldn't be Lewis who replied. The trench had always been a place of strange acoustics. Even in training, divers warned how sound traveled differently here, bending and stretching until whispers sounded like shouts and shouts carried like whispers. But no distortion in the world could explain hearing the exact same line twice, perfectly mirrored, with no delay. My thumb hovered over the comm switch, a part of me desperate to call out, to test if Lewis was still alive on the other end. Yet every fiber of instinct urged me to stay silent. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, while a voice behind you whispered to step forward. "Hey, it's me," the voice repeated again, softer this time, like it was growing tired of waiting. I clamped my jaw tight, refusing to answer, even as sweat began to bead at my temples beneath the helmet. My breathing grew too fast, fogging the edges of my mask, and the regulator hissed louder than ever. Each breath I took sounded like a betrayal, a signal to whatever was out there that I was still alive, still listening. I gripped the tether rope instinctively, though I'd already severed it, and felt only the loose end coiled against my belt. The silence that followed was worse than the voice itself. I turned my light upward, half expecting the bubbles to reappear, but the water remained black and endless. The trench had a way of swallowing everything. Light, sound, even time, until you couldn't trust your own senses anymore. For a moment I thought about rising anyway, ignoring the rule, clawing for the surface no matter what, but then I remembered Lewis telling me once about a diver named Carter, who panicked during a trench dive, and swore he heard his dead wife calling his name over the comms. He answered her, begged her to help him, and the others said his voice never came back. They never found his body either, just his empty tank drifting upward like a gravestone. The memory steeled me. I steadied my breathing, forcing the regulator into a rhythm that didn't betray my panic, and slowly angled my torch back toward the canyon wall. The jagged rock jutted out like crooked teeth, each shadow darker than the last, but I thought I saw movement between them. Not fish, not the darting flicker of something small, but a shape that lingered too long, watching. My pulse hammered as I drifted lower, trying to keep the wall at my side. If I couldn't trust the comms, then my only hope was to trust my own eyes, no matter how little they revealed. Then the voice came again, but this time it didn't try to sound like Lewis. "We know you're down here." The words scraped across the comms with a texture that felt too thick, too deliberate, like someone forcing their throat to mimic speech. My hand twitched toward the switch again, wanting to scream at it to shut up, but I caught myself just in time. That was the trick. That was always the trick. They wanted me to speak, to acknowledge them, to open a door I couldn't close again. The rule wasn't about hearing voices. It was about resisting the urge to answer them. I cut my torch for a moment, plunging myself into pure darkness. It was reckless, maybe suicidal, but I needed to know if the thing was watching me, or if it was just using sound as bait. In that pitch black, the weight of the trench pressed harder than ever, every nerve in my body screaming to flip the light back on. I floated there, counting the seconds, and just as I reached 10, I heard it. Breathing, slow, wet, and ragged, so close it might as well have been inside my helmet. My stomach lurched, bile burning the back of my throat, but I forced my hand steady as I flicked the light back on. The beam cut through the black, and caught nothing. No shape, no face, no movement, only the endless drift of particles in the water, like dust in a forgotten room. But my heart stopped when I glanced up. Just a few feet above me, bubbles rose in a new column, too perfect, too steady. They weren't mine. Worse, they were exhaling in rhythm with my breath, mocking every inhale and exhale I made. I wanted to scream, to bolt upward no matter what waited above, but the comms hissed again before I could move. This time, the voice was almost gentle, like a lullaby whispered to a child. "Come closer." Only 2 words, repeated once. identical both times. I froze, lungs burning as I tried to hold my breath, as if denying it oxygen would starve it out. My hand brushed against the knife, strapped to my thigh, the weight of cold steel grounding me. I couldn't fight the trench, couldn't fight whatever wore voices like masks, but I could remind myself that I was still real, still alive, still something it couldn't imitate. For now, the bubbles drifted downward this time, not up, reversing the natural order, as if gravity itself had turned inside out. My torch beam trembled as I tracked them sinking into the trench, each silver bead carrying my reflection in miniature, distorted and stretched. One of them popped just in front of my mask, and for a fraction of a second I saw an eye inside it, wide and unblinking. The comms roared with static, so loud it rattled my teeth, and underneath it I swore I heard a chorus of voices, all repeating the same phrase, "You'll answer eventually." My hand slipped against the tether coil, nearly losing it entirely, but I forced myself to grip tight. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My silence was the only shield I had left. The comms went dead as suddenly as they had flared, and the trench swallowed the sound whole, leaving me gasping inside my helmet. My regulator hissed, bubbles rising once more. Mine this time, I was sure of it. But as they drifted upward, I realized something horrifying. The bubbles above weren't heading to the surface anymore. They were circling, spiraling into a perfect ring, and the water inside that ring began to ripple, as though something massive was opening its eyes. The spiral of bubbles parted slowly, and the water inside shimmered with a faint distortion, like heat rising off asphalt. My instincts screamed that something had just opened its gaze on me, and I needed an anchor before the trench swallowed me whole. My torchlight swept the canyon, and I pressed myself closer to the rock face, jagged edges scraping against my suit. That's when I remembered Rule 3, always keep one hand on the wall, a rule that wasn't about balance as much as survival. The wall was the only thing that couldn't lie, the only constant in a place that wanted you to lose direction. I stretched my hand along the stone, its rough texture grounding me, cold and solid in contrast to the fluid void beyond. My heartbeat slowed slightly as my palm traced its surface, finding ridges and cracks that told me I was still in a physical place, not drifting into some endless hallucination. The wall was my compass, my anchor, a reminder that even when light and sound turned traitor, stone remained stone. My torch beam wavered into the open water, but the thought of letting go even for a second made my stomach knot tight. The canyon floor plunged into darkness below, but along the wall I could see faint scars carved deep into the rock, grooves far too smooth to be natural. My gloved fingers traced one absent-mindedly, the groove wide enough to swallow my whole arm, and I realized they weren't random at all. They looked deliberate, like claw marks or something dragged repeatedly against the surface. My breath hitched as I wondered who else, or what else, had once clung to this wall. Had they kept their grip all the way back to the surface, or had the trench pulled them away when they faltered? The comms remained silent now, but that silence felt more dangerous than the voices. It meant whatever had spoken before was waiting, patient and confident. The trench didn't need to chase. It only needed me to drift too far from the wall. My hand clenched tighter, palm pressing against every jagged edge, ignoring the sting as small cuts tore through the glove. The pain was real, grounding. Real meant alive, and alive meant I still had a chance to climb out of this abyss. I just had to keep my hand on the wall, no matter what tried to draw it away. The trench had its tricks. Divers talked about phantom currents, sudden rushes of water that tried to push you off course. I always thought they were exaggerations until the first blast hit me. The current shoved hard from the left, aiming to peel me away, my body twisting as the tether coil slapped against my hip. My torch spun with me, beam slicing through the water in frantic arcs, but my fingers dug into the rock, knuckles white beneath the glove, and I held on until the current passed. My shoulder screamed with pain, but I was still against the wall, still anchored, Breathing hard, I realized how easy it would have been to let go, just for a second, to adjust or fight the pull. But that second was what the trench waited for. That was what the rule meant. Not a suggestion, not superstition, survival. I forced myself forward, inch by inch, one hand trailing the wall, while the other steadied the torch. My light flicked across another groove, then another, hundreds of them gouged into the rock face, a silent map of everything that had come before me. Some scratches went deeper than others, as if made by something with patience, something that had clung here for a very, very long time. Lewis's voice suddenly broke the silence, faint but frantic. "You need to answer me now." My whole body locked. It sounded real, desperate, not the hollow imitation from before. I wanted to respond, to shout back that I was alive, but the rule burned in my mind. And not just rule 2, this one too. Keep your hand on the wall. If I reached for the comm switch, I'd have to let go, even for a moment. My hand twitched, torn between loyalty to my partner and loyalty to the stone beneath my palm. The canyon seemed to sense my hesitation, the water thickening like molasses around me. I forced my focus back to the wall, dragging my hand along the sharp ridges until the sting of fresh cuts anchored me again. The voice continued, pleading, swearing my name, but I grit my teeth and refused to let go. Maybe it was Lewis, maybe it wasn't. I couldn't take that chance. My light swept over another scar, and for a moment, I froze. This one wasn't a scratch or a groove. It was a handprint, perfectly shaped, human-sized, pressed deep into the rock, as though the stone had been soft when it was made. My glove brushed against it, and I swore it was warm. The warmth spread up my arm, a pulsing heat that felt alive, and I yanked my hand back instinctively. For the first time, I let go of the wall. Instantly, the canyon shifted. The floor below tilted, the water spun, and my whole body lurched sideways into open black. I gasped, regulator hissing violently, torch beam jerking in chaotic spirals. I reached blindly for the wall, fingertips brushing empty water, and the panic hit like a physical weight on my chest. I was drifting, untethered. The trench had me. My torch cut across the canyon just in time to catch a figure. It clung to the wall, effortlessly, skin pale and stretched, long fingers digging into the grooves like they belonged there. Its face turned toward me slowly, features blurred as though watered, and yet its mouth moved in perfect sync with Lewis's voice in my ear. "You shouldn't have let go." My stomach dropped, bile rising in my throat, and I kicked wildly, slamming my body back against the rock until my hand found purchase again. The warmth of the handprint lingered on my glove, searing like a brand. The figure didn't move closer. It didn't need to. It simply watched, clinging to the wall with an ease that made my struggle feel pathetic. My hand ached from the pressure of holding on, but I knew the rule was the only thing keeping me alive. Always keep one hand on the wall. If I let go again, even for a breath, I knew it would take my place, and I would never find my way back. I forced myself to inch forward, dragging my palm along jagged ridges, each cut and scrape a reminder of what I still was. Human, alive, clinging to survival. The figure's mouth stretched wider, too wide, until it split its jaw in a grotesque imitation of a smile. Then, without warning, it began to climb upward, scaling the wall faster than any human could move. My torch followed it, dread building with each movement, until I realized where it was heading. Straight up, toward the surface, toward Lewis. My throat clenched as I gripped the wall tighter, torn between chasing it and surviving. My choice didn't matter though. The wall beneath my palm shuddered suddenly, a deep vibration that rolled through the stone like a heartbeat, and from the canyon below, something much larger began to rise. The vibration in the wall didn't fade. It deepened, becoming a steady pulse that rattled my bones. My fingers trembled against the rock, each beat stronger than the last, as if the trench itself was alive and waking beneath me. I tilted my torch downward, and that's when I remembered Rule 4. Never look directly into the rising shadows. The words hit me like ice in my veins, because I realized the rule wasn't about darkness in general. It was about the kind of darkness that moved, the kind that wasn't supposed to exist at all. The beam of my torch cut through the abyss, and I saw it, not an object, not a creature, but a swell of blackness that pushed upward against the water itself. It wasn't absence of light, but something thicker, denser, like tar rising in a slow, deliberate current. My instincts screamed to shine the light straight into it, to know what was coming, but the rule whispered louder in my head. If I looked directly, if I tried to see its form, the trench would have me. My chest heaved, bubbles exploding upward as I dragged my torch back to the safety of the wall. The water around me shifted with its movement. Every rise pulled the current tighter, wrapping around my body like invisible coils. My tether line shivered violently against my hip, thrumming like a guitar string. I pressed my hand harder against the wall, forcing my breathing steady, but every instinct told me the thing below was aware of me now. I couldn't see its eyes, if it even had them, but I felt its attention like a spotlight. My pulse raced faster than the regulator could keep up with, and for a terrifying second, I thought I'd choke on my own breath. I angled the torch away, but in the corner of my vision, the shadow swelled larger, stretching up the canyon like a tide. The temptation to look directly at it gnawed at me, sharper than hunger or thirst. If I just glanced, if I just turned the light toward it, maybe I could understand what I was facing. But the memory of the rules echoed with a sharp finality. Not looking wasn't cowardice, it was survival. And if I gave in, I wouldn't live long enough to regret it. My fingers dug deeper into the stone, nails biting through the glove as I kept my gaze fixed on the ridges in front of me. Behind me, a new sound emerged, a low hum, not mechanical but organic, like the vibration of an enormous throat preparing to speak. It resonated through the water, through my body, shaking every cell until my teeth ached. My mind scrambled to assign meaning. Whale song, seismic shift, anything but what it truly was. The trench was calling upward, and the shadow was answering. I squeezed my eyes shut, torch beam shaking against the wall, and muttered through the regulator like a prayer. Don't look, don't look, don't look. The hum rose higher, vibrating the regulator in my mouth, and for an instant I thought the sound would split me apart. I risked a glance sideways, not directly, but just enough to catch the edge of movement. The water rippled as though a massive curtain was being drawn upward, folds of shadow weaving into the current. My peripheral vision blurred, the edges of the canyon bending unnaturally, as if the presence itself was warping the trench around it. I jerked my gaze back to the wall, nails tearing through the glove, blood mixing into the water in faint red plumes. Something brushed against my fin. Not current, not stone, something solid. My body froze, lungs burning, as I held my breath without realizing it. The touch lingered, not pulling, not shoving, just resting, testing. My instincts screamed to kick, to thrash, to fight, but the rule gave me a razor-thin path to follow. Don't look. As long as I didn't look, I wasn't prey. My entire body shook with restraint, muscles aching with the urge to flee, but I kept my gaze locked forward, tracing each groove and scar in the wall like a lifeline. The presence didn't leave. It rose higher, brushing past me in deliberate slowness, the way a predator circles to measure its prey. My peripheral vision caught glimpses, something impossibly large, larger than any whale, moving without displacement. It carried silence with it, swallowing the faint crackle of my comms, and even the hiss of my regulator. The water around me went still, suffocating, as though the trench itself was holding its breath. I clenched my jaw so tightly my teeth throbbed, forcing myself to drag air through the regulator in shallow, silent pulls. The humming stopped, the silence after it was worse, pressing down like a physical weight. For a moment I thought it had gone, that the rule had protected me. But then faintly, a voice bloomed inside my head, not through the comms, not through my ears, but deeper. It spoke in a language I couldn't understand, yet the meaning was carved instantly into my thoughts. Look. My eyes watered with the pressure of resisting, the command digging into my skull, sharper with every second. My body wanted to obey. My neck twitched against the helmet, as though something inside me tried to turn it on its own. I pressed my forehead against the stone, blood from my torn hands streaking across the wall, and screamed through clenched teeth inside the mask. The sound was mine, but it steadied me. My voice was human, and the wall was real, and I would not look. The shadow pressed closer, presence swelling until my ears rang, and my vision blurred from strain. Then, as suddenly as it had come, it pulled away. The water shifted, the hum fading, and the pressure lifted from my skull. My knees buckled with relief, and I almost collapsed against the wall, still gasping like I'd run a marathon. But the trench wasn't done testing me. Above, the pale figure I had seen earlier clinging to the wall began to descend again, its long fingers carving fresh grooves into the stone as it moved. Its mouth hung open in that too wide grin, eyes locked on me, unblinking. It didn't need to tell me to look at the shadows. It already knew I had fought the urge. And the way it smiled, I realized it wasn't disappointed. It was patient. The rules weren't there to protect me from failure once. They were there because the trench would keep testing until I broke. The figure stopped only a few feet above me, hanging upside down like an insect, fingers hooked deep into the rock. Its head tilted, jaw clicking audibly through the water, and for the first time, it spoke through the comms in a warped version of Lewis's voice. If you don't look, you'll never know what's rising. My skin crawled at the mimicry, and my grip tightened on the wall until I thought the bones in my hand would crack. The torch beam flicked up just enough to catch its smile, and in the blackness behind its teeth, I thought I saw movement. Not light, not shadow, something else waiting inside. The hum began again, low and distant, echoing from the depths below. This time, it wasn't just one voice. Dozens of them joined, overlapping into a chorus that rattled the trench walls. My entire body shook with the vibration, and the figure grinned wider, pointing one finger downward into the abyss, as if daring me. I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to follow, but in that moment, the water grew colder, and my tether line jerked hard enough to pull me off balance. My hand slipped from the wall, and my eyes shot open in panic, torch beam slicing downward, directly into the rising shadows. The beam of my torch fell into the mass below, and the shadows responded instantly, writhing as if I had just woken something ancient and hungry. My stomach dropped with the weight of it, and before I could wrench the light away, I heard a voice crackle through the comms. "Hold steady. You're almost clear," it said, and the voice was Lewis, calm and familiar. My relief was instant, but then I froze as the memory of Rule 5, do not trust the voices that sound like your crew, seared into my mind. My blood chilled, because Lewis had died 5 years ago, swallowed by this very trench. The voice didn't stop. It grew clearer, warmer, as though Lewis himself was right beside me in the water. "You're doing good," it said, the tone a perfect match to his old encouragement during dives. My hand tightened on the torch, knuckles white under the glove, as a shiver slid down my spine. If I answered, I risked acknowledging it. If I ignored it, the sound might grow sharper, more insistent. I clenched my jaw, forcing silence, but the temptation gnawed at me. My brain wanted to believe, wanted comfort in this suffocating dark, but the rule was carved into me for a reason. The tether line tugged again, this time gentler, like someone guiding me forward. "Easy now," Lewis's voice soothed. "Just a little farther, and you'll be safe." The pressure in my chest threatened to break me. Every syllable was too real. I remembered late nights on deck with him, remembered the way he used to hum under his breath before a dive, and then I realized, with a sick twist in my gut, the voice on comms was humming now, the same tune. The trench wasn't just mimicking sound, it was pulling memory straight from me, warping it into a lure. I forced my gaze back to the wall, torch angled just enough to keep the rising shadows at the edge of my vision. My pulse thundered in my ears, drowning the words, but they pressed harder, sweeter. Don't be afraid. You can let go of the wall. I'll catch you. My hands ached from clinging to the stone, but the thought of release nearly broke me. For the briefest moment, I wanted to believe him, to imagine Lewis still alive, reaching for me through the dark. My throat burned as I swallowed hard, whispering inside the regulator, "You're not real." The response was immediate. The humming stopped, and the voice sharpened into something colder. "If I'm not real, then why do I know what you saw in his locker?" My breath hitched violently, because no one else knew what I had found after Lewis's last dive. The torn logbook, pages soaked in salt, scribbled with desperate notes about the rules. My torch shook, beams scattering across the trench, and the voice laughed. The sound was wrong now, warped like it was underwater, but it carried enough truth to twist my gut. It knew things it shouldn't. It knew me. The figure clinging to the wall above shifted, head tilting as if amused. My ears rang with the voice's next words. "You've already broken one rule. How long before you break this one too?" The mockery burrowed deep, dragging doubt with it. My grip faltered, and for a split second, I almost called back, almost begged Lewis for help. The rules didn't exist to trap me. They existed because every instinct I had would betray me down here. My hand slammed harder into the stone, glove tearing further as I bit down on the regulator to keep from speaking. The comms buzzed with static, then cleared, and this time another voice filled the channel, softer, familiar in a different way. It was Elena, my sister. My stomach lurched at the sound of her calling my name, pleading, "Please come home." My lungs clenched as if the air had been ripped from them. She'd never stepped foot near the trench, never even seen this ocean, yet her voice wrapped around me like a tether stronger than any rope. My eyes burned with tears, blurring the wall before me, and I almost whispered her name back before catching myself. This wasn't Elena, this was the trench. My hand pressed to my chest as if I could steady the wild pounding there, but the voices overlapped now, Lewis and Elena speaking together, weaving memories and guilt into one perfect snare. The current shifted with them, pressing me gently away from the wall, coaxing me toward the abyss. I clenched my legs, forcing myself to stay, but my body screamed with the effort. The voices promised warmth, safety, reunion, but behind the sweetness was hunger, thinly veiled. I knew deep down, if I answered them, the trench wouldn't just take me, it would wear me, the same way it wore Lewis's voice. I squeezed my eyes shut, but shutting them didn't stop the words. They filled the inside of my skull, seeping into my thoughts, until I couldn't tell where their memories ended, and mine began. Every failure, every mistake, every ghost from my past was replayed in their tones, bending me toward surrender. "All you have to do is say yes," Elena whispered, "and you'll never be alone again." My nails scraped stone until they tore free of the gloves, blood blooming in small clouds. I needed an anchor, something real, so I focused on the pain, on the tearing of skin, and the sting of salt, and held on. But the trench wasn't done. The voices cut suddenly, leaving silence that was somehow worse. My comms hissed faintly, then cleared once more, and this time, it was Captain Harrow. His voice was clipped, commanding, perfectly familiar. "Pull your torch down now," he barked, just as he had 100 times before on deck. My body almost obeyed without thought. My arm twitched downward before I forced it still. If the trench could wear Lewis, if it could wear Elena, why not Harrow too? The rules weren't suggestions, they were survival, and I couldn't afford to mistake an echo for truth. The silence stretched thin, and then softly, the voice said something else, something only Harrow had ever told me in confidence. "The rules aren't enough." My blood froze in my veins. That phrase wasn't written anywhere, wasn't known by anyone else. My chest tightened as I realized the trench wasn't just pulling from memory, it was pulling from secrets, from pieces of me I'd never spoken aloud. My hand slipped on the wall, panic flooding through me, and the shadows below pulsed higher, as if waiting for me to finally give in. I forced my eyes open, staring at the jagged ridges of stone until they blurred. "You're not him," I whispered, voice muffled in the regulator, but saying it nearly broke me, because some part of me wanted it to be true, wanted someone else to bear this weight with me. My comms crackled, and the voice laughed again, low and certain. "Then who are you speaking to?" My throat closed tight as the realization hit. Even resisting, I had already broken the edge of the rule. I had spoken back, and the trench would never let that go unanswered. The tether line jerked violently, dragging me from the wall. My torch beam swung wide, catching only glimpses of writhing shadow below, and in the comms the voices screamed together in unison. Lewis, Elena, Harrow, a chorus of people I loved and trusted. My body spun, the current pulling me away from safety, and for the first time, I felt my will crack under the weight of it. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound was swallowed instantly by the abyss. The tether line yanked me away from the safety of the wall, dragging me into the center of the trench, where the shadows pulsed like a living tide. My arms flailed instinctively, scraping across the jagged ridges, and that was when the sixth rule seared into my memory. Rule 6. Keep your hands away from the carvings in the stone. My blood went cold as I realized what my glove was touching wasn't just random ridges, they were deliberate marks, deep grooves shaped into spirals and lines that seemed to writhe beneath my fingers as though alive. The carvings felt warm against my palm, impossibly warm in the freezing depths, and for a fleeting moment I thought I felt something pressing back. My pulse thundered in my ears as I yanked my hand away, but the damage was done. A thin trail of blood from my torn gloves smeared across the stone, and the carvings responded. The spirals glowed faintly, pale blue at first, then brighter, until the trench wall looked alive with veins of light. I jerked backward, legs kicking wildly, but the tether line pulled taut again, dragging me closer to the illuminated symbols. The water vibrated with a low hum, and the glow spread wider, connecting patterns across the wall until they formed shapes that looked disturbingly like faces. Dozens of them, hollow-eyed and gaping-mouthed, emerging from the stone as if trapped inside. My chest clenched, air flooding my regulator in frantic bursts as the realization set in. These weren't just carvings, they were warnings. Markers of those who had come before me, those who had touched the trench and never returned. My stomach twisted violently as the faces blinked in unison, their stone lips moving soundlessly, begging me to join them. The tether line dragged me closer until my helmet nearly scraped the glowing spirals. The warmth radiated stronger now, seeping through my suit, pressing into my bones. Against my will, my hand stretched toward the carvings again, fingers trembling with the urge to press into their grooves. It was like a compulsion, as if my own body betrayed me. My eyes darted toward the rising shadows below, then back to the stone faces, and for the first time I wondered if the rules weren't just to keep me alive, but to keep the trench from claiming me piece by piece. I forced my hand back to my chest, fingers digging into the harness until they ached. My body shook with effort, but the carvings pulsed brighter, each glow syncing with the thundering of my heart. A memory surfaced, Lewis's logbook, the smeared line of writing I hadn't understood back then. "The wall wants your name." My throat clenched as I realized what he had meant. The carvings weren't just marks, they were signatures, left behind by every diver who had given in. My hand hovered inches from them, blood dripping from my torn fingers into the grooves, and the glow flared brighter in response. A sudden noise tore through the comms, not a voice this time, but a distorted wail that rose and fell in waves. The sound made my teeth ache, vibrating deep in my skull. It wasn't coming from above or below, it was seeping out of the carvings themselves. The stone faces moved in unison, their mouths widening until the glow poured out in streams of pale light that coiled like tendrils in the water. One of them drifted toward me, curling lazily like smoke, and brushed against the side of my helmet. The touch burned cold, so cold it felt like my skin was cracking beneath it. I screamed into the regulator, kicking hard to push away, but the tether line held fast. The light tendril wrapped around the helmet, tightening, and for a split second, I saw something reflected in the glass. Not my own face, but Lewis's pale, eyes wide, mouth opening as if to speak. My chest convulsed, and the rule thundered in my mind again. Hands away from the carvings. If I touched them now, if I gave in, my name would be carved there too, and I'd be nothing more than another face in the stone. With a surge of desperation, I twisted my body, jerking the tether line against the jagged rock until it frayed slightly. My lungs burned as the tendril pressed tighter, frost cracking across the inside of my helmet. I slammed my shoulder into the wall, ignoring the agony, as the carvings flared brighter, and the tendril snapped free with a shuddering crack. My body spun in the current, chest heaving with ragged breaths, but I was free, for now. Yet the wall still glowed behind me, and I could feel the pull of it like gravity, begging me to reach back, to finish what I had started. The figure above me moved again, long fingers curling deeper into the wall, as if drawing power from the carvings themselves. Its grin widened, splitting its face unnaturally, as the glow reflected in its eyes. It tilted its head toward me, and tapped the wall with one claw-like finger, sending another pulse of light, rippling outward. The stone faces shifted with it, their mouths forming a single word I couldn't hear but felt deep inside my chest. My body shivered uncontrollably, because in that moment, I knew they weren't just asking for my hand, they were asking for my surrender. The tether line jerked violently one last time, pulling me downward toward another section of wall, where the carvings were deeper, darker, and still unlit. My bloodied fingers brushed close again, just shy of sinking into the grooves, and the hum around me swelled like a chant. My vision blurred, the trench spinning as if the water itself had lost balance. I clenched my fists tight, whispering through the regulator with what little strength I had left. "You can't have me," but as the words left my mouth, the carvings below flickered to life, glowing brighter than ever, and one of the faces formed into something horribly familiar, my own. The glow of my own face in the stone nearly broke me. My torch beam wavered, and for a second the trench seemed to pulse brighter in response, as if mocking me. My breath rattled loud inside the helmet, each exhale fogging the glass, and I felt the weight of the next warning press against my skull. Rule 7. Never let the light go out completely. The thought hit harder than the others, because my torch flickered then, a faint stutter of dying power, and the realization clawed into me that if the light died, I wouldn't just be in darkness, I'd be in their darkness. I shook the torch violently, coaxing it back to life, the beam shivering across the stone carvings until they dimmed again. My bloodied hand ached from the effort, but I refused to loosen my grip. The faces in the wall blinked, some fading back into stone, others lingering long enough to smirk before vanishing. I pressed my body against the trench wall, chest heaving, and whispered through the regulator, "Stay alive, damn it." The trench answered with silence, thick and smothering, and I knew if the light went out, silence wouldn't be all that filled it. The figure above shifted again, eyes catching the faint glow of my flickering torch. It tilted its head, grin widening, and for the first time it opened its mouth fully. No sound came, but the water around me seemed to ripple with the movement, carrying an intent I could feel in my bones. My torch sputtered once more, weaker this time, and the figure leaned closer like it could sense my desperation. Panic surged, and I fumbled at the backup clipped to my harness, fingers trembling. If the main beam failed, I needed the spare, or I'd be blind, and blindness down here wasn't just dangerous, it was a death sentence. I clipped the backup light free just as the main one gave its longest, sickest flicker yet. The trench plunged into near darkness, shadows swelling instantly, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. My heart slammed against my ribs, sweat stinging my eyes inside the helmet. I fumbled with the switch, praying the backup would spark, and when it finally flared to life, I almost sobbed with relief. The shadows recoiled, slithering back into the depths, but not far, They lingered at the edges, restless, watching. I knew then the rule wasn't about seeing my way forward. It was about keeping them back. The tether line tugged again, and I nearly dropped the backup light as I spun to follow it. My chest heaved with every pull, bubbles erupting from the regulator in frantic bursts. My main torch dangled uselessly at my side now, its beam little more than a sickly glow. I forced myself to strap the backup into my hand, securing it tight, because if I lost it, I was finished. The trench seemed to pulse with irritation, shadows swelling closer each time my beam wavered. I muttered under my breath like a mantra, "Never let it out, never let it out." The faces carved in the wall stirred faintly, faint lines of light tracing their mouths again. But this time they weren't pleading, they were smiling. Smiling because they knew how easily the trench could take me if the light died. My stomach turned with nausea, bile rising in my throat, but I pushed it down, forcing steady breaths. My hand cramped around the light, muscles screaming, but I couldn't let go. Each flicker in the beam sent shivers down my spine, each second a reminder that the batteries weren't infinite, that time itself was against me. A voice broke through the comms, soft at first, then clearer, "Battery won't last." My blood froze as the words twisted through the static, familiar yet distorted. It was Lewis again, his tone crueler now, dripping with mockery. "They never last. You'll be in the dark soon." I clenched my jaw until it hurt, refusing to answer, but my grip on the light trembled. He was right. Even if I obeyed, even if I held on, the trench could just wait until the light burned out naturally. The rule was about survival, but survival wasn't forever. The figure above scuttled further down the wall, long limbs dragging against the carvings with a noise that vibrated in the water. My light caught its face for only a moment, but it was enough to make my stomach lurch. Its grin had widened into something inhuman, splitting almost ear to ear, teeth jagged and endless. The beam shook in my hand, scattering light across its body, but where it should have had a chest, there was only hollow darkness, pulsing faintly like a second void within the trench. It recoiled slightly from the light, but not enough. The rule was holding it back, for now. I tried to push upward along the wall, forcing my body to move despite the weight of exhaustion dragging me down. My legs kicked weakly, every motion heavy in the crushing water, but I couldn't stop. The light was fading again, dimmer with each pulse, and panic gnawed harder at my chest. The shadows below writhed hungrily, stretching upward like fingers reaching for me, and I knew if they caught me in total darkness, there'd be nothing left to fight. My teeth chattered with more than cold, as I whispered through clenched teeth, "Not yet, not yet." The beam sputtered one last time, and I thought it was over. My lungs seized with terror, my hands numb from gripping so hard. But then the backup flared brighter than before, almost blinding in its intensity, and the shadows shrieked back into the depths. The sound wasn't audible, not in the way a scream should be, but I felt it inside me, tearing through bone and marrow. My ears rang with pain, vision fracturing as if the trench itself was furious. The faces in the stone writhed in agony, mouths open wide as their light bled out in streams of white, dissolving into the water around me. I gasped into the regulator, throat raw, as the water cleared of the glowing streams. My body shook violently, muscles threatening to give in, but I couldn't stop moving. My hand clung to the light, as though it were my last tether to life, and maybe it was. The trench pulsed again, but weaker now, as though retreating. I should have felt relief, but instead a sick dread settled in. The rule had kept me alive, yes, but every second the light dimmed was a countdown I couldn't reset, and the trench knew it. The figure finally pulled back, limbs vanishing into the upper dark, leaving only the faint trail of disturbed water in its wake. For the first time I was alone with the silence, but it wasn't peace, it was anticipation. The trench was waiting for the inevitable, waiting for the light to fail me. My chest heaved, air running thin, and I realized with cold certainty, even if I obeyed every rule perfectly, I was still fighting against time itself, and down here time wasn't on my side. That was when the tether line snapped. The sharp crack of the tether snapping echoed through the water like bone breaking, and my chest clenched so tight I thought my heart might stop. For a second, I just floated there, stunned, clutching the backup light as bubbles streamed upward in a chaotic rush. The thin line that had been my only lifeline now drifted in tatters, useless, swaying with the current. And that was when I remembered Rule 8. Never swim toward the voices that call your name. It slid into my mind like a blade, cold and merciless, just as the first sound reached me. My name, spoken faintly, stretched and muffled as if carried on the water itself. At first I told myself it was the comms, some garbled echo of Lewis still bleeding through the system. But the more I listened, the more wrong it felt. The voice was too close, curling into my ears with an intimacy that made my skin crawl. "Daniel," it whispered, drawn out like a lover's sigh, and my stomach twisted in revolt. The sound came from below, not above, and with each syllable it grew clearer, stronger, like someone just beneath me was speaking directly into my helmet. My legs stiffened, fighting the instinct to kick downward toward it, the raw pull of something unnatural beckoning me closer. The backup light trembled in my hand, the beam scattering across the trench walls, catching glimpses of carvings I hadn't noticed before. These weren't faces anymore, but mouths, dozens of them, open wide as if gasping for breath. Their stone lips seemed to stretch wider as the voice called again, softer now, sweeter, almost pleading. It said my name in a tone that mimicked my mother's, and for one wild second, I almost broke. My throat tightened with grief and memory, but deep in my gut, I knew the truth. The trench was imitating, twisting something personal into a lure, and if I obeyed the instinct, I'd never return. I clamped my teeth together and forced myself to look upward instead. My bubbles streamed above, disappearing into a curtain of darkness that felt thicker than the water itself. The light revealed nothing but shifting currents, no sign of the surface, no sign of rescue. My tether was gone. My only direction now was instinct, and the rules. An instinct screamed louder than logic to turn toward the voice, to answer it, to move closer. My knuckles whitened around the light as I shook my head violently, muttering through the regulator, "Not real, not real, not real." The voice didn't like that. It deepened suddenly, dropping into a guttural tone that vibrated through the water, making my eardrums ache. "Daniel," it snarled now, sharp and furious, and the mouths in the stone seemed to quiver with the sound, as if they were speaking in unison. The current shifted at the same time, dragging at my legs, pulling me subtly downward. My limbs fought against it, muscles screaming with effort, lungs aching as panic surged hotter than ever. I couldn't fight both gravity and deception at once, and the trench knew it. For a moment I thought I felt fingers brush against my ankle, cold, slick, unmistakably human. I kicked hard, twisting upward, sending the light beam spinning wildly across the trench. Shadows writhed at the edges of the glow, but when the beam steadied again, nothing was there. The voice, however, had changed once more, softer again, as if apologizing. It wasn't my mother this time. It was Lewis. "Don't fight me, Daniel. You'll drown alone if you don't come closer." His tone carried both familiarity and command, enough to rattle me deeper than I wanted to admit. My chest burned with both rage and grief, because Lewis was gone. I knew that. The trench just wouldn't let me forget. I forced myself upward inch by inch, legs trembling, lungs screaming for calm. The voice persisted, changing from one mimicry to another. A childhood friend, an old instructor, even my own voice echoing back at me like a twisted reflection. Each name calling sent spikes of doubt into my mind, shaking the fragile focus I clung to. My vision swam with exhaustion, but the rule pulsed inside my skull louder than the voices, keeping me tethered to reality. I repeated it silently, over and over, drowning out every other call until it felt carved into my bones. Never swim toward the voices that call your name. The trench didn't relent. The current surged harder now, pressing against my chest as if an invisible hand were dragging me downward. My light beam quivered wildly, and for a brief second, I saw something moving below, a shape, shifting just at the edge of illumination. It was human-shaped, floating lazily, arms spread wide as though waiting for me. My heart plummeted, because it wasn't just any human shape, it looked like me. My own face stared upward, distorted by the water, smiling faintly as it whispered my name again. I almost broke then. My chest heaved, regulator hissing in frantic bursts as I fought the primal pull of recognition. My own double reached up with pale hands, beckoning silently, lips curling wider each time I resisted. The urge to give in swelled so strong it drowned thought itself, and I screamed into the helmet just to fight the noise. My own distorted face twisted into a frown at the sound, eyes narrowing in rage, and then it began to swim upward after me. My legs burned with agony as I kicked harder than ever, the light beam shaking with every frantic motion. The water roiled around me, colder now, heavier, as though the trench itself was trying to collapse upon my body. The voices screamed all at once, a chorus of names that weren't mine but felt like mine, and I realized with raw terror that this wasn't a trick for one diver. This was for anyone foolish enough to descend here. The trench collected voices, like it collected faces, wearing them as masks to drag new prey down. The doppelganger reached for my leg, its hand inches away, fingers trembling with hunger. My body screamed at me to stop, to let it catch me, because part of me believed it was safety. But deep in my chest, the rule burned hotter than instinct, and I wrenched myself upward with every shred of strength left. The beam of my light caught its face fully this time, and the sight nearly broke me in two. My own eyes stared back, black pits leaking shadows. My own grin stretched wider than human skin should allow. It wasn't me. It never was. I screamed again, the sound muffled and torn by the regulator, and kicked with everything I had. My lungs clawed for air, my vision swam with dark blotches, and still the thing pursued. The voices clawed at my ears until blood trickled faintly from them, warm against the cold water. My double lunged again, but just as its fingers brushed the beam of my light, it recoiled with a shriek that tore through the water like metal grinding against metal. The sound made me convulse in agony, but I kept moving upward, desperate, furious, terrified. The shriek faded into silence, but I didn't trust it. My legs burned, muscles spasming with each desperate kick, but I refused to stop. The faces in the stone blurred past me, mouths stretched wider, as if laughing now, mocking my struggle. My light wavered dangerously, dimmer than before, and I felt the weight of inevitability pressing in again. My tether was gone, my air was thinning, and now the trench had my voice in its collection. Then the comms crackled, louder than ever. A voice came through, steady and sharp, and it was my own, but not the mimic. This was real, from above. "Daniel, surface now, don't listen to them." Relief and terror hit me at once, because if the crew could still reach me, then I wasn't lost yet. But if they could reach me, then so could the trench. And then, before I could answer, another voice cut in, identical to the first. "Daniel, surface now, don't listen to them." The comms hissed with static as the two voices overlapped, each carrying the exact same words, the exact same rhythm, but one of them had to be wrong. My throat tightened, breath coming in sharp bursts as the words echoed in my helmet. "Daniel, surface now. Don't listen to them." That was when I remembered Rule 9. Never trust the voice that repeats twice, and my stomach twisted like a knot. The trench didn't just steal faces or bubbles. It stole sound, bending it into something that was almost real, almost safe, until you leaned too close. For a moment, I froze in the water, torn between the two identical commands. Both voices sounded steady, both perfectly matched to the crew I had known for years, but one was bait, pure and lethal. The worst part was how desperately I wanted to believe them both. How much I longed for someone to guide me upward. My limbs trembled with exhaustion, lungs aching, every muscle screaming to obey whichever voice was truly human. Yet beneath the desperation, I knew the trench wanted me to hesitate, to doubt myself, to lose precious seconds in choosing. I forced myself to listen deeper, straining past the static, desperate for some imperfection to separate the real from the false. Sweat stung my eyes despite the icy water pressing around me, and my light flickered weakly, leaving my vision swimming in shadows. Both voices repeated the command again, perfectly in sync this time, and the chill in my veins turned to fire. The trench was mocking me now, playing with my need for rescue, dragging me into a spiral of panic where the only outcome was failure. My hand clenched around the regulator until my knuckles ached, because I knew if I chose wrong, I'd be following the trench itself. A third voice broke through suddenly, weaker than the others, but trembling with urgency. "Daniel, don't answer." It was barely more than a whisper, buried in static, but it cut through me like a knife. This one didn't repeat, didn't echo itself, didn't try to force command. It was almost too faint to trust, but that alone gave it weight. The trench never whispered, it always demanded. Still, doubt gnawed at me, because if the rules taught me anything, it was that hesitation could be just as deadly as action. My lungs burned hotter, reminding me that time was bleeding away with every breath. The two stronger voices grew sharper, angrier, as if they sensed my resistance. "Daniel, surface now. Don't listen to them," they said again, but this time there was no space between the words, no humanity in the tone. They sounded like a recording played too many times, the edges grinding against my skull. My stomach lurched, bile rising in my throat, because I finally heard it. The unnatural smoothness, the lack of breath between syllables, the perfect repetition that no human mouth could sustain. And just as I recognized it, something shifted below me in the dark, stirring the water like a predator circling its prey. The whispering voice returned, closer now, though I couldn't tell if it came from the comms or the trench itself. "Keep moving. Don't stop." I wanted to scream back, to demand who it was, but my jaw locked tight, the rule burning like fire inside me. Never trust the voice that repeats twice. I forced my legs to move, each kick sluggish, heavy, but upward still. The trench pressed harder against me, as if resisting my climb, currents dragging at my limbs with invisible claws. My light dimmed further, shadows thickening, until I felt more blind than sighted. Something brushed my shoulder. I spun violently, the light cutting across the dark, and for a fraction of a second, I saw a face floating just behind me. Lewis again, pale and swollen, his lips moving with the words I'd heard. "Daniel, surface now. Don't listen to them." His mouth worked the phrase over and over, mechanical, lifeless, a puppet of water and shadow. My gut clenched so hard I thought I might vomit inside the helmet, but I tore my eyes away, thrashing upward with renewed terror. I didn't need the rule to remind me now. I could see the mimicry with my own eyes, but the trench wasn't finished. More voices filled the comms, all repeating the same command, overlapping until it became a sickening chant. "Daniel, surface now. Don't listen to them." Dozens of tones, male and female, young and old, all cycling the same words in perfect, endless repetition. My ears throbbed with pain, blood seeping into the water around me as the chant grew louder, vibrating in my skull until I thought it might split. The chorus of lies tried to drown me, each phrase dragging me closer to despair. I bit down hard on the regulator, blood filling my mouth as I swam harder. Then all at once, silence. The comms cut completely, leaving nothing but the ragged sound of my own breath. The absence was worse than the noise, sharp and sudden, like a trap snapping shut around me. I drifted, trembling, waiting for the next assault, when a new sound seeped into the water. It wasn't through the comms this time. It was all around me, a heartbeat, slow, steady, thunderous, pulsing through the trench like the rhythm of something massive and alive. My chest seized with primal terror, because this wasn't the ocean's rhythm. This was something that had been waiting here long before me. long before any of us. The heartbeat grew faster, louder, shaking the water, rattling the light in my trembling grip. I tried to move upward, but the current pressed down with the weight of mountains, trapping me in place. The dark below stirred again, and this time the light caught glimpses of movement, arms, dozens of them, reaching upward with grasping fingers, each one attached to faces I had seen before. They mouthed the same phrase in silence now, lips moving in unison. "Daniel, surface now. Don't listen to them." My lungs seized in panic, my vision swam with black dots, and I realized the chant hadn't ended at all. It had simply changed form. The arms stretched higher, swaying like seaweed, brushing just shy of my fins. I kicked violently, tearing myself upward, light scattering across the endless mouths, endless faces, all locked in the same hollow plea. My heartbeat thundered against the rhythm of the trench, weaker with every stroke, until I thought the two would merge into one. I refused to look down again, refused to give the voices a chance to find my weakness, but the pressure in the water told me they weren't stopping, they were following. The whisper returned one last time, piercing through the chaos with a clarity that froze my blood. "Daniel, don't surface." The whisper's warning coiled around my mind like barbed wire, cutting into every shred of certainty I had left. I'd been fighting my way upward with every ounce of strength, but those 4 words made me freeze in place, heart pounding against my ribs. That was when the weight of Rule 10. Never look directly at what waits above the surface sank into me, the memory surfacing like a curse I'd tried too hard to forget. If the trench didn't drag you down, then something else waited above to claim you, and the thought hollowed out my lungs even faster than the climb. The urge to surface was almost unbearable. My tank was running low, each breath tasting thinner, ragged, desperate. My body screamed for air, for light, for anything that wasn't the crushing dark of this endless trench. Yet the warning lingered like venom in my veins, reminding me that not all dangers were below. I tilted my light upward, daring to pierce the black curtain, but something in me resisted, some primal fear that even the act of looking might open a door that could never close. My hands shook violently as I forced the beam back down, away from the surface, away from temptation. The water pressed tighter as if mocking my hesitation. The arms below writhed and reached, lips still mouthing the endless chant, but I felt no safer staying here than moving upward. Panic gnawed through my chest until I thought I'd rip the regulator out just to scream. Yet some deeper instinct told me silence was my only shield. My light flickered again, weaker, dimmer, and in its frail glow I saw bubbles. Not mine, not anyone's, rising past me, racing toward the surface as though they belonged to something invisible. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself not to follow them, not to give in to the hypnotic pull. My comms sputtered back to life with a sharp crackle, and a voice hissed through, distorted but clear enough to make my blood run cold. "Almost there, Daniel. Don't be afraid. Look up." The words dripped with false comfort, each syllable wrapping around my ears like a noose. My throat convulsed with the effort not to answer, not to even acknowledge the call. But then another voice, softer, trembling with urgency, broke through on top of it. "Don't look, Daniel. No matter what you hear, don't look." The two voices clashed in my helmet, pulling me apart like predators fighting over prey. My light finally died then, plunging me into darkness so complete it felt like being swallowed whole. The trench pressed in, alive with whispers, the water vibrating with something massive shifting just beyond my reach. My lungs heaved, my vision swam, and for the first time I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Maybe the trench wasn't my enemy. Maybe it was protecting me from what waited above. The thought was madness, yet it burrowed deep, refusing to leave. My pulse hammered louder, urging me upward, but the rule thrummed stronger still, warning me that the surface itself might not mean salvation. I swam blind, every kick weaker, every second heavier. My ears rang with phantom voices urging me to look, promising light, warmth, rescue. everything I craved most. They dangled safety like bait, like the bubbles I wasn't supposed to follow, and the pull nearly shattered me. My muscles screamed, lungs clawing for air that wasn't there, when suddenly the water around me shifted. It wasn't the trench this time. It was the current from above, pressing downward like a giant hand, halting my climb, and through that current I felt it, a presence waiting just out of reach, patient, enormous, hungry. My mind cracked under the pressure, and for one terrible moment, I tilted my head upward. I didn't see light, or the reflection of the surface, or the stars beyond. I saw a shape, vast and writhing, stretched across the water like a shadow blotting out the sky. Its edges bent unnaturally, as if stitched together from waves themselves, and in the heart of it, eyes opened. Dozens of them, huge and unblinking, staring down into the trench like it had always been watching. My chest seized with such violent terror, I almost blacked out. I snapped my gaze away, but the image seared into my brain, unshakable, eternal. The voices screamed in fury, overlapping in my helmet until it felt like my skull might split apart. "Look at us, Daniel. Look." My hands clamped over my ears instinctively, though it did nothing to silence the rage pouring in. I kicked downward violently, trying to escape both above and below, trapped in an ocean that hated me from every direction. My body felt broken, every breath shallow, every muscle trembling with collapse. The weight of the trench and the gaze of the surface crushed me in equal measure, and I realized then that survival wasn't about climbing out. It was about not looking back, not giving in, not letting either side own me completely. My regulator hissed weakly, air thinning fast. My head spun, darkness blooming at the edges of my vision. Somewhere between the static, the voices shifted again, softer now, desperate. "Daniel, just one glance more, please, just one." They sounded like everyone I'd ever loved, every memory I'd ever cherished, and the ache of wanting to see them was unbearable. My eyes twitched, fighting the urge, and I knew if I looked again, I'd never leave this place. I pressed my eyelids shut so tightly, it hurt, tears stinging, bubbles streaming past my face as I whispered the words in my head like a mantra. Never look directly at what waits above the surface. And that was when I felt it, a hand warm this time, not cold like before, brushing against mine in the dark. Fingers curled softly, gently, tugging me upward with patience rather than force. For a second, I almost surrendered, almost let it guide me toward whatever waited above. My chest convulsed with longing, because the touch felt human, safe, even kind. But then the warmth faltered, the grip tightening too hard, nails biting into my skin through the glove. My stomach dropped, because I knew it was only another mask, another trick. I yanked my hand free with a violent twist, kicking downward just as the water above split open with blinding light. The trench roared around me, the water shaking as if caught in the throat of some great beast. The light above spread wider, flooding the darkness, and even with my eyes shut tight, I could feel it pressing against me. My lungs screamed with agony, my body nearly limp with exhaustion, but I forced myself lower, anywhere but up. The last breath in my tank rattled weakly, fading into silence, and the world around me spun in dizzy fragments. For a moment, I didn't know if I was sinking or floating, only that I couldn't stop. The surface wanted me too much, and the trench refused to let me go. Then the voices stopped, the current stilled, the light faded, silence wrapped me like a shroud, suffocating but strangely calm. My limbs drifted uselessly as the last air hissed away, bubbles fleeing upward into the dark, and in that silence, a single whisper returned, so close it felt like it came from inside my helmet. "You looked." The whisper lingered in my helmet like smoke, impossible to clear, choking every breath that wasn't there. "You looked." It wasn't just an accusation. It was a sentence, a reminder that Rule 11, if you survive, Never speak of what you saw was no longer some distant warning, but the only thing keeping me tethered to life. My chest convulsed, burning, lungs begging for air that refused to come, and yet the rule sank deeper than the need to breathe. If I told anyone, if I even thought about letting the truth escape, something far worse than drowning would come for me. I didn't know how I was still conscious. My tank had emptied, bubbles gone, lungs screaming, body convulsing with violent spasms that made every muscle lock. Yet I wasn't dead. My thoughts swam, fractured, but one truth cut through the haze like a blade. I wasn't allowed to die yet. Something was keeping me alive, forcing me to bear the weight of what I'd seen, because that was the cruelest punishment of all. The trench had spared me, or maybe the thing above had, but only on the condition that I carried this secret to my grave. I drifted, weightless, in the silence between currents, my vision blurred with spots of red and black, the kind that usually marked the edge of consciousness. Yet I lingered there, hovering at the brink. The whispers had gone quiet, no more voices urging me up or down, no hands pulling or pushing, only stillness. It should have been peace, but it felt like standing in a locked room with the door sealed shut. Somewhere deep in the black water, something was watching, waiting, ensuring I didn't speak, didn't betray what I now carried inside. My body was mine, but my silence belonged to them. The surface wasn't far now. I could feel it above, that thin line between ocean and air, freedom and ruin. My instincts raged at me to swim, to claw upward with the last twitch of strength I had left. But the memory of those eyes burned hotter than oxygen starvation. If I surfaced, if I spoke, I'd bring them with me. Every bubble that left my lips might carry their truth, and they wouldn't let that happen. So I floated there, suspended in terror, knowing the rule was the only thing left keeping the world safe from whatever stared down at me through the water. Time lost meaning. I didn't know if seconds or hours passed in that silence, but when I finally blinked, the water above wasn't black anymore. A faint glow shimmered, pale and silver, as if the moon had broken through. I felt the pull stronger now, not from the trench below or the whispers within, but from the surface itself. My body rose against my will, limbs limp, head tilted upward, eyes sealed shut to avoid another mistake. I wanted air more than I'd ever wanted anything, but the weight of the rule pressed harder than the ocean ever had. Never speak of what you saw. The glow intensified, bleeding into my helmet until it was impossible to ignore. My heart rattled, torn between dread and desperate hope. Maybe it was rescue. Maybe a searchlight from the vessel. Maybe I wasn't abandoned after all. But the memory of those eyes, stitched into the sky above the waves, made my gut twist with fear. If I broke the surface, I might not see my crew. I might see them. And if I spoke even a word, even a broken syllable of what I'd witnessed in the trench, I'd doom more than myself. My silence was a shield, fragile and heavy, but it was all I had left. The water broke around me. My helmet breached the surface, air brushing my lips, sharp and freezing, flooding me with such relief that I almost sobbed. The taste of oxygen was sweet, jagged, electric, dragging me back from the edge of unconsciousness. I coughed, convulsed, gulped greedily at the night air, but all the while I kept my mouth shut against words, against truths. My crew wasn't there. No vessel lights, no hands reaching for me, just an endless stretch of moonlit waves, and silence so unnatural it rang louder than any scream. I was alone, but not free. The ocean around me shifted, waves rising and falling with a rhythm that wasn't natural. Each crest seemed to breathe, each trough a heartbeat, as though the sea itself was alive and pulsing with what I'd seen below. The moonlight glistened across the water, too steady, too focused, and I realized then it wasn't the moon at all. It was an eye, enormous and unblinking, staring down with a patience that froze my veins. My lips trembled with the urge to cry out, but the rule echoed louder. If I spoke, I wouldn't just be heard, I'd be claimed. I floated for what felt like forever, caught between survival and silence. My radio crackled once, weak. "Daniel, do you copy?" But I didn't answer. I couldn't. My throat locked, fear burning hotter than the need for connection. They were listening. I knew it. Every word I didn't say kept them at bay. Every secret swallowed whole another hour of borrowed life. My hands ached to reach for the mic, to tell someone what I'd endured, to demand rescue, but the rule was a leash around my neck, and I knew better than to pull against it. The waves carried me, slow and deliberate, as though guiding me somewhere. My body was too weak to resist, too battered to fight, so I let them drag me across the endless black. I thought of my crew, of the laughter before the dive, of voices I might never hear again. I thought of my family, faces I might never see, truths I could never share. The weight of silence was heavier than the water had ever been, but I clung to it because the alternative was worse. They wanted my story. They wanted to spread through me like a disease, and I refused to be their carrier. Hours later, or maybe only minutes, I spotted lights on the horizon, a vessel's glow cutting through the night. My heart surged with relief, but dread followed close behind. Rescue meant questions. Rescue meant explaining why I was alone, what happened in the trench, what I saw when I broke the rule. Rescue meant speaking, and speaking meant death, not just for me, but for anyone who listened. I felt tears break free, hot against the salt of the ocean, because I knew I couldn't tell them. I couldn't tell anyone. My silence was my only weapon, and my only prison. The vessel drew closer, its searchlight sweeping across the water until they blinded me, searing away the moonlit eye for just a moment. Voices called out, urgent, panicked, alive. "We've got him, pull him in." Strong hands gripped my arms, dragged me onto the deck, and for the first time, warmth enveloped me again. Blankets wrapped around my shivering body, faces crowded close, questions fired faster than I could process. Where's the others? What happened down there? Daniel, talk to us. My lips parted, but no words came. My throat clenched, the rule thrumming in my skull like a living thing. If I spoke, we were all lost. Their faces blurred as exhaustion dragged me under again, but I felt their stares linger, confusion heavy, fear growing. They didn't understand why I couldn't speak, why I only shook my head and sobbed in silence. They thought I was broken, traumatized, too shattered to tell the truth. Maybe that was safer. Maybe that was the only way to protect them, because if I gave voice to what I saw, if I let the words slip free, then the trench and the thing above would know I had betrayed them, and they'd come for every last soul on that deck. I lay there trembling, staring at the night sky, praying the eye wouldn't return, that the moon above me was real this time. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time. I had broken the rules. I had seen. I had looked. And now the silence was all I had left between myself and the thing that waited patiently for me to falter. My story ends here, not because it's finished, but because it can't be told. To survive is to remain silent. To remain silent is to never truly escape. So I'll leave you with this. If you ever find yourself descending into those waters, remember every rule I told you. Don't follow the bubbles. Don't answer the whispers. Don't look up. And above all else, if you live to tell the tale, don't. Because some truths were never meant for the surface. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and subscribe for more.